As we reported earlier, the Senate today rejecting a bipartisan deal on immigration, leaving the lives of hundreds of thousands of so-called dreamers in doubt. Denise Gonzalez is one of those dreamers. She is also a paralegal and tenant organizer with Mobilization for Justice. Also with us, Ernie Collette is a staff attorney for the organization. Ernie, I'll start with you because we have news out of the Senate. They put up several bills, all getting voted down, including the one that Eric Ham reported had the best shot at passing. Where does this all stand as of now?
Effectively, right now, where it stands is we're sort of at a restart. The Senate basically said they were trying to get the vote passed today so they can actually push this onto the House. With all these bills sort of being rejected either for on purely partisan reasons, for either it being not enough in terms of enforcement or for immigration, specifically with the 1.8 million looking as an amnesty for Republicans. Effectively what's going to happen is they're going to take a recess next week and evaluate it, but it puts a serious deadline to the date certain on March 5th. On March 5th.
Denise, you've been in this country about 16, 17 years now. You must be feeling like the train is going over the cliff.
No, absolutely. It's, I think, a time of uncertainty for anyone who's a DACA recipient or TPS for that matter. But I think that when it comes to DACA, which is what affects me personally, you know, I'm standing to lose a lot from everything from my position at the organization that I currently work at to, you know, being dropped from my college because undocumented students in New York can't afford, don't receive financial aid, which means that we pay tuition out of pocket, and so without DACA, without having a feasible salary, we will not be able to actually pay for school.
Chief of Staff John Kelly said that deporting dreamers is not a top priority, but you just raised a very interesting point. You'll have no ability to earn a living because you can't work without working papers.
Exactly, and so I will be pushed back into the informal economy, which absolutely does not provide a standard of living.
How do you feel about President Trump's position, which is build a wall and he will provide a pathway to citizenship for 1.8 million people, more than the dreamers out there?
I think that it's disingenuous for politicians from both parties to attach enforcement to any bill at this point when we have had 10 years of essentially failing to pass any bipartisan bill that provides actual permanent relief for people, while we have seen, you know, administration after administration, Congress pass budget bills that include enforcement anyways. And so to say that we have to attach enforcement to these bills, I think is disingenuous, and also sort of provides a cover for, I think, what has been an exuberant amount of money being spent on enforcement for the last 10, 15 years.
And Ernie, President Obama was criticized of ramping up deportations, and that sort of got us to where we are now.
In a sense, that's correct. The prior administration, actually, President Obama has the unfortunate circumstance of being the president under watch of having the most deportations occur. But what we're seeing now with an executive order that was signed in early January of last year, we're seeing wider dragnets. We're seeing immigrants being literally ripped away from their children and their spouses and their families, people that have no criminal issues or very minor issues that have led to massive enforcement. So as opposed to what happened in the Obama administration, where they were doing higher priority for national security purposes or immigrants that have massive criminal issues or major criminal issues, we're looking at sort of a wider net being cast, and a lot of families are being torn apart as a result.
On Tuesday, a federal judge ruled the Trump administration cannot end the DACA program. First, what was the legal basis of that ruling? And do you have any sense that the administration will abide by it?
Well, the legal basis is a preliminary injunction, which effectively stipulates that the program, while it won't allow people to sign up for DACA, it'll allow individuals who will not have their DACA expire past the March 5th deadline to continue to renew. So individuals will continue to renew while the case is pending. What the Trump administration had asked for a couple of weeks ago in January, which the Supreme Court actually granted, was an opportunity to be heard, to not have the cases both in Brooklyn and in California, because there were two separate cases, actually go up to their respective circuits, the Second Circuit and the Ninth Circuit, but to actually have argument over the case in the Supreme Court. And that is actually scheduled to have an argument over the courts tomorrow. So we should find out whether or not the court will actually schedule a hearing for this.
The Supreme Court.
The Supreme Court will schedule a hearing for this in spring, or if it'll actually go back down to the circuit courts where they'll
and the spring is a little late, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You work with Dreamers. What are you hearing from them?
Well, I think that for us, it's just increased anxiety. Many of us, especially people who have been part of the immigrant rights movement and have seen sort of the trajectory of increased enforcement, also are dealing with PTSD, mental health issues, coming out of the experiences of organizing, being activists in this issue, and having our own families be targeted for deportation. And so, I think that right now I'm working with students at Lehman College, which is where I study, to try and figure out how our administration can support us in, for example, not dropping students who can no longer pay their tuition, or even offering mental health services, financial support for students who may need it.
Under the Trump proposal, it would end what he calls chain immigration, and some see that as a very divisive term. What is your position on families bringing their family members in?
I think that we should be opening our borders as much as possible given the refugee crisis that's going on around the world. Again, I really reject any idea that immigrants are the cause of national security issues, to the extent that we're seeing violence occur and sort of be bred in home in our own country. And so, and I think that the U.S. also has a responsibility, to the extent that they're involved in many of the international crises, to also offer refuge for people who are fleeing violence, whether it be economic or military.
Ernie, do you think the part of the plan here by the president was to put the feet to the fire of Congress, and he thought maybe they'd get something done, but they're not getting anything done right now?
I mean, that's certainly one way of looking at it. Another could be a strategy in order to actually delay the opportunity for this Dreamer decision to actually be adjudicated, or to be decided by Congress. One, you can look at it from a perspective of trying to actually enforce and setting a date certain. The problem with a date certain, and as we've seen, unfortunately, with Congress, is that we sort of put ourselves right up to the last minute to actually decide these issues. And when you're having 800,000 or potentially 1.8 million people have that anxiety on the line, it could be a little bit too much. So really what should happen is that there should not have been a date certain. The DACA should have continued, and the legislation should have actually been able to do their jobs and actually pass something, hopefully a clean Dream Act, which is what the advocacy communities in New York and around the country are actually hoping to get.
Denise, are you making plans for the worst case scenario?
Yeah, I think that, ever since Obama signed DACA as an executive action, we've known that it's a temporary solution at best, since it has always been conditional and temporary, and put the onus on people to continue to renew it and make sure that they're in the circumstances to be eligible. And so I think that, we have been in limbo pretty much since the early 2000s.
Yep.
Yeah, and, there is an increased anxiety with this administration, given like the racial overtones of the narrative right now, but I think that for a lot of us it's familiar, it's a little bit more intense, and we're definitely using it as an opportunity to reflect on the last 10 years of the immigrant rights movement, when both parties have sort of failed to pass something substantive for us.
Okay, Denise Gonzalez, Ernie Collette, keep us posted, please.
Thank you very much.
Come back.
Thank you for having us.
Coming up next, where the jobs are, the latest business news. You're watching Arise America.